This year, you're going to be flooded with bad news. War, famine, political chaos, a planet in crisis. The list goes on. The sheer volume of it all is enough to make anyone feel powerless and small. We're living in a constant whirlwind of information that leaves us anxious, angry, and hopeless about things that feel totally out of our control. And that's by design. It's the result of a world we've built, a 24-hour news cycle engineered to keep us scrolling, and social media algorithms that get rich off our outrage. It's a feedback loop of negativity. But what if the answer wasn't a bigger protest sign or shouting louder than everyone else? What if the very first step to fixing the world was fixing the way we think about it? There's an ancient toolkit for the mind that's been used for centuries to find clarity in the middle of chaos. It doesn't need a smartphone or a subscription. It's a simple idea, accessible to all of us right now, and it starts when we learn to think like a philosopher. Let's be honest, the daily flood of bad news is exhausting. It's a non-stop stream of information that hits our most basic survival instincts, making us feel threatened and overwhelmed. And when we're emotionally overloaded, what do? We either shut down completely or we react without thinking, which usually makes things worse. We get so caught up in the emotional fire of the moment that we lose all sense of perspective. The problem is, the world's biggest crises, climate change, injustice, economic instability, aren't simple. They're huge, tangled systems that have been growing for decades, sometimes centuries. You can't solve them with a single tweet, a clever slogan, or a burst of anger. Yelling into the void might feel good for a second, but it doesn't change the broken structures causing the problems. And this is where we get stuck. We see the symptoms, the wildfire, the scandal, the crash, and we react. But we miss the disease. We're so busy fighting individual fires that we don't see that the whole forest has been drying out for years. This is the tyranny of the immediate, a state of constant reactive crisis management that stops us from ever getting to the root causes. We're stuck on a hamster wheel of outrage, and it's burning us out and dividing us. So, how do we get off? The answer is to take a step back, to trade that frantic reaction for some quiet reflection. This is the simple idea. To fix the world, we first have to think about it differently. We need to adopt a philosophical mindset. Now, when you hear philosophy, you probably picture old guys in togas debating things that have nothing to do with real life. But that's a total misconception. At its core, philosophy is the most practical tool we have. It's the art of thinking critically, analyzing logically, and exploring different viewpoints to really understand what's going on. It's a way to move past pure emotion and see the bigger picture. Thinking like a philosopher really comes down to three things. First, you have to question everything. Philosophers are famous for relentlessly asking why. The Socratic method, which is over 2,000 years old, is all about digging under the surface of an issue. It's a way of asking sharp questions to challenge our own assumptions. When we do this with the news, we stop just swallowing headlines and start chewing on them. Why is the story being told this way? Who benefits from this version of events? This simple shift turns us from passive consumers into active, critical thinkers. Second, thinking like a philosopher means we need to define our terms. So much of our public debate is a total mess because we're all using the same words, but talking about different things. We argue about justice, freedom, or fairness without ever stopping to agree on what we actually mean. Philosophers insist on being clear. They know you can't solve a problem if you can't even agree on what the problem is. And third, it means breaking down giant problems into smaller pieces. The idea of fixing climate change is so massive, it's paralyzing. A philosopher, though, would break it down. They'd ask, what are the specific ethical questions here? For instance, what responsibility do wealthy nations have versus developing ones? What is the moral duty of one person when their own carbon footprint seems like a drop in the ocean? By breaking the problem apart, it stops being a terrifying monster and becomes a series of smaller, connected challenges we can actually start to work on. This shift in thinking isn't just a mental exercise. It has real, practical effects on how we live and act as citizens of the world. When you start thinking like a philosopher, you become a better caretaker of the planet and for the people on it. Let's circle back to the climate crisis. A philosophical approach helps us get past the dead-end debate about whether individual actions matter. Climate ethicists argue that while your personal choices might seem tiny, they're critical for building collective movements and acting with integrity. It's not just about measurable impact, it's about personal and shared responsibility. Thinking this way forces you to see your role in a larger system. It builds a sense of stewardship not from guilt, but from a clear-eyed understanding that we're all connected. This way of thinking also builds empathy. By looking at the ethical side of global problems, we have to consider other people's points of view. When we analyze debates around global migration, for example, a philosophical lens requires us to look past simplistic labels and think about the fundamental human rights and moral claims of everyone involved. It pushes us to understand the complex history and economics that lead to these situations in the first place. This mindset also helps us develop what the ancient Stoics called apatheia, a state of calm, clear-headedness, free from wild emotional swings. This doesn't mean becoming a robot. It means not letting our emotions hijack our brain. When faced with bad news, the philosophical move is to steady yourself, focus on what you can actually control, and act with purpose instead of panic. This emotional resilience is vital for the long, hard work of making a difference. It helps us keep going when we face setbacks and have tough conversations without getting consumed by rage or despair. So, how do you actually start? You don't need a fancy degree or a library of dusty books. You can start today. The next time you see a news story that makes you feel angry or hopeless, just pause, take a breath, and ask yourself 3 simple questions. What are the biggest assumptions being made in this story? 2. What are the most important words being used, and what do they really mean? 3. If I break this problem down, what's one small piece I can try to understand better, or maybe even do something about? Just try this for a week. Instead of reacting, reflect. See how it changes your perspective. And if you're up for it, share what you find in the comments below. What problem did you look at, and what did you see when you put on your philosopher's hat? When you do this, you're not just managing your own anxiety. You're taking part in a tradition of critical thinking that every healthy society needs. You're taking the first step to becoming a more thoughtful and effective citizen. We're always told that to change the world, we need more activism, more tech, more money, more everything, but we've forgotten the most powerful engine of change we have: the human mind. The world's problems are definitely complex, but the starting point for solving them is simple. It's the decision to think more deeply, more critically, and more philosophically. This isn't about finding one easy answer that will magically fix it all. It's about adopting a new process, a new way of being in the world. It's about having the humility to admit what we don't know, the courage to ask tough questions, and the wisdom to act with intention instead of on impulse. The storm of bad news isn't going to stop. The world will keep throwing heartbreaking challenges our way, but we don't have to be passive victims of the chaos. By embracing the simple idea of thinking like a philosopher, we can reclaim our sense of agency. We can turn our powerlessness into purpose. And together, by changing our minds, we can start the slow, difficult, but necessary work of changing the world.